Hello, I'm Mandi McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk. In this edition, we talk rural broadband. The scheme targets those living in rural areas which are highly remote. Has the government been ambitious enough in selecting its partners, Telecom and Vodafone? Wool Partners Cooperative has failed to convince wool growers to give it the capital that it requires. What does this mean for the troubled industry? Will a woolly phoenix rise from the ashes? And New Zealand's rural demographics show massive changes. How will this insidious creep affect our rural communities? Joining me today is Conor English, CEO of Federated Farmers New Zealand, and Rod Oram, who's a business commentator. Welcome, guys.
Morning.
Morning.
Conor, as reported online in Country 99 TV, Wool Partners New Zealand failed to meet its commitment of raising capital. However, around about 40 million tonnes of wool was committed to them. What went wrong?
Oh, look, I think they actually did pretty well to get as many commitments as they did. It has raised a lot of debate around wool, but I think after the Christmas period, the price of wool did go up. I think farmers felt a bit better. There was quite a concerted campaign from the exporters against the proposal, and there was a wee bit of nervousness or confusion, if you like, about the role of PGG Wrightsons and just how that transaction operated. So I think they did pretty well to get as much support as they did, and I think it is a bit of a shame that they haven't got over the line. I guess it remains now to see where to from here, given that they have got that support. So it provides an opportunity.
Rod, we know that a united approach to the industry is what we need to make wool successful. However, what has been reported is that some of the personalities involved in Wool Partners Limited were actually the limiting factor. Is this actually true or a red herring, do you think?
I think it's a bit of a red herring. I'd certainly take Conor's arguments there in terms of the short-term issues. I would add a longer-term one, which is that the proposition being put to farmers actually, for my money, wasn't compelling enough. So, yes, it's about the brand, but a good brand isn't going to be enough. There needs to be a bigger ambition, a much more coherent business strategy around it. Now, you could say that's a failure of leadership, perhaps it is. But if I was a wool farmer, I'd be pretty tired of these efforts that we've had and getting a bit cynical about whether one's going to work. So I think there's really big work to put into a more compelling proposition, in which case I'd hope farmers would get back behind it at that point.
Conor, do you think that now that the seeds of change have been sown, that we will actually see something rise from the ashes of this? I'm not going to call it a failure. I'm going to say it was an attempt, because I don't actually think it is a failure.
Yeah, look, I think there has been a mood for some change, absolutely. But I think Rod's right. You know, we have been around the mulberry bush a fair bit on this over the years. The key thing is that farmers get more money for what they sell. And I've always been of the view that what matters most in that is actually at the demand end or at the customer end, rather than at the so much at the supply end. And so there is an opportunity now to see what happens. And Wools of New Zealand, I think some have described that as the sort of jewel in the crown. That's part of an organisation that is up for sale, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But there's definitely a mood by farmers that they want more return, obviously. And if we're going to keep the wool industry progressing, they simply need to earn more money. I mean, you don't want to forget that in the 1950s, it was about 52% of our exports was wool. Now we send more gold to Australia than we sell wool to the rest of the planet. So it's a fantastic product. It's got a lot of potential, but unfortunately we've never really realised it for the benefit of New Zealand. And
there's a real problem with PGG Wrightsons, because if this Chinese bid for Wrightsons is successful, my personal view is forget it, because all the intellectual property in Wrightsons gets flicked offshore very quickly. And if I was a wool farmer, I would be very concerned about that being in Chinese hands. This isn't an anti-Chinese sentiment. It's just that it's very opaque about what these Chinese are up to and what they're going to be doing. So if they win control of Wrightsons, and Wrightsons is a crucial part of any consortium, farmers are going to need to ask some tough questions and get some very big commitments from the new owners of Wrightsons before they commit their valuable wool.
Rod, what do you think it's going to take for farmers to realise that the power is in their own hands?
It is in their own hands, but only, and again, I'm going to be reasonably radical here, as long as they understand exactly what's going on downstream in the supply chain, all the way out to the retailers. Because we know that the bulk of our existing customers for our products are the likes of very powerful, very well-established British supermarkets and the like, who take the lion's share of the profits. So I would say the power is in farmers' hands, but not really to do much about redressing the balance with those existing big customers. The real power would be for farmers to come together to create some very new value chains far more directly to customers, where they would have far more control all the way out to those customers. That's a radical view. That's very hard to do, but that's where the real power would lie.
Okay, I'd like to talk, Conor, now about rural broadband, because earlier this week you had a meeting. Is the government being ambitious enough by only involving Telecom and Vodafone in this program?
Look, we've been very passionate about rural broadband because it matters enormously to New Zealand, and it matters for two reasons. One is that it's a huge connector for people, so the social implications of broadband are absolutely critical. The second thing, though, is that if we want to earn our way out of the maelstrom that we're in as a country, we need to make sure that our most productive sector has actually got the tools, the next big enabler, which is rural broadband. So in our view, it should be the #1 priority for the government, actually. It's been a bit of an add-on to the urban broadband side of things. So what we are working on is we've got the money up, $250 million more now to be spent on rural broadband than what was initially proposed. What we're now working on is making sure that we squeeze the lemon and get that to go as far as possible to as many people as possible. And yes, we don't think that the government is being ambitious enough, frankly, and we want them to stretch the goals a bit and to put a lot more pressure on the people that are in the bidding process than what they're currently doing.
Conor, you talked about many people. Rod, we've seen a change in the demographics of our rural population. What do you think these changes actually mean to, say, the likes of broadband or to the delivering services to our rural community, which is now only 14% of the vote?
We sometimes lose track, I think, in terms of how we define ourselves as a country, and miss the point that we're actually one of the most urbanised people in the world in terms of the percentage of population living in towns and villages. So we still very much define ourselves by our rural life, which is great. I think there's enormous potential to have many more people living in rural areas, hopefully working in great rural jobs, and broadband is one of the components that makes that happen. So I think we can get a better balance here, but it is things like rural broadband, but it's also things about some economic development strategies in many regions of the country to make sure we build some great jobs there. I know it can be done, and it would be great to see that a bigger range of activity and jobs and skills needed out in the rural part of the country, so we can get that balance better and attract people back to rural living.
Very quickly, Conor, you've done some work on the rural demographics. What are you seeing? What's the biggest change?
Oh, look, what you're seeing is that once people leave school, they're leaving. And that's understandable if they're going for further education.
Leaving the farm?
Yeah, they're leaving the countryside. They're going for further education when they're, that sort of 18 to sort of 23-year-old will often go to university or some other training outside of the local region. That's fine, but what they're not doing is coming back. And we've got quite a big bulge of people sort of from the 50 to 70 age group, but under that, we're hollowed out, and so that just means there's less people to work on our farms, there's less people to buy the farms. So not only are we seeing that gross change in terms of numbers, we're also seeing big change within regions and also within family structures. So in the old days, like when I grew up on a farm, I'm one of 12 kids, that would be an exceptionally sized family now, but it meant there was a lot of people to choose from in order to, take over the farm or do some work on the farm.
So what we really need to do is make agriculture a bit more attractive and sexy again. Thanks, guys. After the break, super ministries, are they a step back to the future? And who really owns us? We take a look at who owns our brands, our icons and our farms. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Recently, the National Government announced the possibility of merging the Ministries of Fisheries, Forestry and Agriculture into one large super ministry. Rod, this feels like going back into the past, does it not?
It does, but I've always been amazed about how many ministries we have. If you look at a government like the Swiss one, I think they've only ever had 8 ministries. And so however much the world economy changes, they still manage to do it within 8 ministries. So it's not a question of size, but how they're organised. So as long as there is good focus on each of those areas within this new super ministry, that's fine. I'm in fact more worried about tourism going into MED, as happened at the end of last year, because I think the focus there will get lost, whereas I'd be more optimistic that fisheries will still be very much a part of the primary sector.
Conor, you were part of John Luxton's ministry way back when this was proposed the first time. Why didn't it happen then, and what do you think's changed now? Well,
look, back when Jenny Shipley was Prime Minister, actually in the mid to early 90s, there was the talk of the super minister, and John Luxton was number 4 in cabinet at that stage, and a very capable minister, obviously, and so they thought they'd give him a bit more workload. But look, I think the reason that it didn't happen then was that there was resistance within the bureaucracy who aren't well known for coping with change, and also a wee bit of a concern that you don't want to get things too big. And I think that'll be the challenge with a super ministry or ministry for primary industries, is just to make sure that there is the focus on the things that they do need to be focused on, and that they're not forever meeting with each other trying to decide when to have the next meeting. And I think that's a bit of a risk.
And do you think there is a danger, Rod? You talked about tourism, for example, going into another department. Do you think there's a danger with some of our things like animal welfare that they will end up becoming shadowed in a combined industry?
Not necessarily, and again it comes back to structure. So you could well imagine there'd be associate ministers for fishery and in some other areas across the primary sector, which is dead right because it's a very big sector. And so as long as there is the right sort of subdivision of activity in there that's well coordinated, don't worry, it won't drop the ball. And the new Chief Executive of Agriculture and everything else is a very capable civil servant. He's done very well in places like Farmac and then most recently in fisheries, so he's bringing that fisheries knowledge in as well. So I'm reasonably relaxed about this.
Conor, do you think it will really bring the rationalisation of spending that the government predicts it will, along with a more efficient portfolio?
Yeah, look, I mean, the government does have to be very careful how it spends its money, and it is about value for money. In MAF right now, there's over 300 policy analysts, for example, and you'd have to wonder about the productivity of those analysts sometimes, to be frank. Also, we do have some very, very good people in the bureaucracy, so it's just getting that balance. But they're going into a world now, having had 10 years where it's, oh, what are we going to spend the extra money on this year, to now, well, how are we going to live within our means and get more outputs for less inputs, which is what the rest of New Zealand's had to live with for the last decade or so. So it'll be interesting to see how it works. But I think Wayne is very good. He will be a very good leader there, and he's in our dealings with MAF since he's come in there, it's been very positive.
The savings are going to be minimal, and really what worries me is that if they started really hacking back on, for example, the policy analysts, because they are very internationally engaged, having to do incredibly difficult things, whether it's on climate change or trade or agricultural negotiations, and then all the policy as it applies back here in New Zealand. And the last thing we need to skimp on is really intelligent work there to make sure that we are absolutely on the right track at home and internationally.
Mm-hmm. Conor, there's been a lot of talk about foreign ownership of land, but recently we saw an article that talked about the actual foreign ownership of some of our brands, some of our really iconic brands such as Tip Top. Are we really being xenophobic, or are there some larger issues at play here?
Well, look, the larger issue at play is that we don't have enough savings as a country, and we don't have the capital pool to invest in good, successful businesses. So that's the challenge we've got as a country. In terms of foreign ownership of land, look, you can't take the land away, but I can understand that people, do get a bit nervous about it. For the last sort of couple of decades, we've had foreigners, buying trophy properties or coastal properties. Now they're getting into more of the mainstream agricultural engine room, if you like. And I think there is a balance to be had on that if we want to make sure that we preserve our owner-operator, family farm.
Rod, the Straight Whare reports that Fonterra has announced this increase in payout. Is this going to help put more money back into the pockets of New Zealand farmers to invest back into agriculture and land?
Again, it comes back to the state of an individual farmer. So there are going to be lots out there who are still really struggling under their debt burden, and I hope they're paying down lots of debt. People with better balance sheets, I hope, will be investing. But one thing I think is reasonably certain is not a lot of this money will flow back through consumer spending and then be that kind of boost to the economy. I think that's great because I think that money should be reinvested in the productive economy. So I look forward to seeing how farmers invest this money well in their businesses.
Conor, anecdotally, roughly a third of the current payout is going into feed costs, which means that of the $7.50 payout, it is equivalent to a $5 payout. Do you think that this is talked about enough in the media?
Look, I think the issue of costs in general are a concern. We've seen the average cost, per kilo go up significantly in the last couple of years. When we had the big payout a couple of years ago, I think farmers took their eye off the ball a bit in terms of controlling their costs. When we had the payout drop down, they got their eye back on that ball. But yeah, I think some farmers with their farming systems are now introducing more feed to try and get more production out of it. And I think they need to think that through about the marginal benefit over the marginal cost of putting in that additional feed.
Is that really a fair thing to say, Rod, when we're in droughts, like, 3 years of droughts? So I'm going to take umbrage at Conor saying that we've invested, and I do agree that we have invested a lot more into large, more feed systems.
Myra, again, I'm always trying to push these issues longer term. And so I think there's a lot we can do to our farming practices to make us more drought resistant and therefore less dependent on suddenly shipping a lot of feed in a drought. And so I'm talking here about soil carbon content and the like, to get that resilience into the farming system and to recognise that the climate is changing, there's greater variability there, and we can't just do quick fixes like another shipload of palm kernel into the country. So we've got to think these things through very carefully because we're really pushing our traditional farming model, and I'm particularly here in dairy, out into new places in terms of those input costs and the like. So
what do you think, Conor? Like do you really think that it's about moving towards higher cost systems, or have we still got it in us, in the grassroots Kiwis, to have a low cost production system?
Well, look, our competitive advantage globally has been that we take the cows to the grass. In the Northern Hemisphere, they take the grass to the cows, the other way around. It takes a lot more energy to do that, and we are seeing in New Zealand different farmers explore those opportunities of bringing the grass to the cows. I think it's a bit horses for courses, but at the end of the day, you have to have more money coming in than you've got going out, and farmers are pretty focused on that, and I'm sure that they will learn and adapt as they try and fine-tune their farming systems to get the best mix.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest changes of perspective that has to happen is that we are not low-cost producers. How can we possibly be when I could go to the United States to a perfectly good arable farming, indeed a great history of pastoral dairy farming like Missouri, and buy land for a fraction of the cost I can here, be paid more for my milk and not put any money into the co-op? We've got to start thinking about these issues and not just say, oh, well, prices are a bit high, we'll get through this if the payout's a bit bigger. It's time for a really big rethink about the long-term future of dairying in New Zealand. There's a great one, but not if we just mess around with incremental change with the existing business model.
So very, very quickly, I just want to bring up the term leadership. Conor, you said before we're losing a lot of our young people. So where are our leaders coming from? Where are the leaders going to be to take the dairy industry forward, to take our sheep and beef industries forward?
Well, I think, we've actually got some fantastic leaders coming through the system, and like in our organisation and Federated Farmers, you see it coming through some of the other rural organisations as well. So I don't think you want to be too negative about leadership. But you are right, we do need to, whilst we've got some great leaders, we also do need to bring people through. And I think we need leaders who really challenge the status quo and do look strategically and more long term. We don't want this looking at your feet looking backwards sort of leadership. We actually want the longer term strategic leadership. And I think we have got some very good leaders, but often people say that they're not quite good enough. Well, if that's what they say, why don't they stand up and be counted themselves?
Fantastic, that's a great point. Coming up after the break, we ask Rod and Conor what's pushed their buttons. Find out who fires them up. Will it be a rant or will it be a rave? We'll tell all after the break. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Time now for our weekly rant. Or rave. Who wants to go first?
Oh, rave.
Oh, brilliant. Go, Rod.
Yesterday I was down in Palmerston North. This was the first annual conference of the Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre. They were opening yesterday their rumen emissions measurement centre, and it was so cool because this is getting sheep and cows indoors to measure their methane, and whereas the Australians had spent $500,000 Australian dollars to build a facility with 2 stalls, down there at Grasslands they have built 24 stalls for sheep and 4 for cows for the same amount of money. Now, how's that for productivity? The other thing was the ongoing conference over 3 days has got scientists from around the world. This is our biggest science engagement with the world, possibly Antarctica's one other, but it's really exciting to see where that's going and already where we're starting to see some benefits come through for farmers. So that's my rave.
I've never heard anyone so excited about cows farting before. That's fantastic. And yes, I know it's not about that. Conor, what are you going to have for us?
Well, there's a lot of things to rave about, actually, and I mean the payout going up yesterday was, certainly helpful to dairy farmers and to the rest of New Zealand. But I guess on the ranting side of it, I mean, I think
you're going to have a rant? How unusual?
Well, no, it's not unusual. We actually talk a lot of positive stuff about a lot of positive things that are happening. But on the ranting side, I think this is actually a very challenging time for Minister Joyce. I think he's got himself into a position that is going to be difficult for him to make the best of.
You're talking about the rural broadband.
Yeah, in terms of rural broadband, there's a fantastic opportunity to be had, and it's going to be interesting to see whether he's got the skills and the maturity, frankly, to show some leadership to actually be more ambitious than what this government's being, because frankly they're not being ambitious enough. And they're going to sell us short as a community if they keep going the way that they're going right now. So, hopefully when I come on your program again, I'll be able to give a different verdict. But right now, Minister Joyce gets about a 4 out of 10 for me on rural broadband. And
4 out of 10 from me on roads, because he's over-investing in urban motorways at the expense of other infrastructure.
Yeah, and actually I'd agree with Rod on that, and I've said this to Minister Joyce, you should invest a bit less in roads and more in rural broadband and more in water storage. Because that provides resilience. If you think it's going to get hotter, it's pretty good to store some water. If you want to improve exports, it's pretty good to have some water because it's a key input in terms of what we produce. And in terms of our supply chain, his argument is that roads are an important part to our supply chain. But as we pointed out to him, we've got a supply chain that's 12,000 miles long. A wee bit of a southerly in the Atlantic sort of slows our supply chain down more than an extra set of lights on the way to the Tauranga port.
Good point.
That's a good point. It is a very good point. Well, my rave goes to Fonterra today, actually, and it's not about the payout increase, although I'm all for that. Thank you very much. My rave is that they have held the price of domestic milk in the supermarkets.
Well, look, as a father of 6, and I live in the city, milk is actually quite a significant cost to us. But I just wonder whether they've made a ride for their own back, because there's a whole lot of things that affect my life, that cost me, and I'd really like those to be frozen as well. And so they've set a bit of a precedent, and I just wonder, I just hope that it doesn't come back to bite them in the future.
So do I, because I think it was a really noble gesture, and it actually made me feel really proud to be a Fonterra supplier and shareholder when I heard that news.
Yeah, but farmers deserve to get international price for every drop of milk or every ounce of wool. And so the real challenge is to make sure that as a country we can earn a big enough living in the world economy that we can afford to pay world price for things, because we're paying world price for oil and lots of other stuff we don't get a break on. So thank you, Fonterra, but please, 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 let's not take our eye off those very big economic challenges.
And it highlights where's the margin been earned in the value chain. And you know, the farmers aren't necessarily earning a whole heap of margin actually. It's other people in the value chain, and maybe they should be looking at their margins if you know, we want to have reasonably priced milk in New Zealand.
Yep, fantastic comments. Look, thank you so much for a really enjoyable discussion. I'm sure everyone has enjoyed it as much as I have. That wraps up our latest edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Again, my guests, Conor English, CEO of Federated Farmers New Zealand, and business commentator Rod Oram. Thanks to you too for watching. Remember to check out my blog online at country99tv.co.nz. I'd love to hear from you. Catch you next time, and in the meantime, keep on talking straight.